Socks on. My feet are cold. So yeah, I wanted to process through a few things to give some observations for anybody who enjoys some of the things that I end up focusing on. But maybe like for anyone who needs qualification, I have an undergraduate with two majors. One's Bible and theology, biblical literature and theology. And the other one is Christian thought and history. So maybe from that perspective, for anyone who needs qualification for some of the things I might say about Christianity, you should just know that it comes from a perspective of looking and interacting with some things historically. Even if you disagree with some of my observations or conclusions, I am coming from a place of looking at some of the ways the world has been for a very long time, especially in relation to Christianity and cultural movements ever since, around the time biblical literature is written in and is supposed to reflect. But for everyone else who doesn't need qualification, you can just listen to the stories and maybe map it out that way. So I want to start by saying the reward at the end might be that I feel like Cracker Barrel getting alcohol eventually may be something that's hopeful, and I'll just have to let you wait until the end for me to circle back around to that, why that seems hopeful to me in our culture. Alcohol and Cracker Barrel. So yeah, go back to the 1920s Scopes monkey trials. For anyone who's not familiar with the Scopes monkey trials, basically this was a time in our American educational system where it was not okay for some schools, it was actually illegal to even consider Darwinian evolution. It was outlawed, and there was a big trial that they were going to litigate this with, and the fundamentalist group of Christians were arguing from their biblical perspective about why we should not teach or even consider Darwinian evolution. They were coming from a very certain viewpoint about the way the world's been, the way they want the world to go. And after this trial was over, I gathered that it was an embarrassing moment, at least in a culture war perspective, and a lot of Christianity in these groups receded into their closets. Not all denominations, but at least these people kind of receded into their closets. And the college I went to actually was born out of this movement. Bible colleges, I gather, were born out of the Christian fundamentalist movement, oddly enough. By the time I was at Southeastern Bible College, there was a lot of progress. A lot of alumni thought that we were liberal because we were able to, when we're of age, drink alcohol. They wouldn't allow it on site on the campus. And, I'm not sure that really stopped everyone. But anyway, for some people, their idea of liberal would be like, if they're letting the kids drink alcohol when they're of age, or letting the students drink alcohol when they're of age, they might just be of the world. But that kind of goes with the fundamentalist mindset, interestingly enough. Broadly speaking, evangelicalism, I gather, was an attempt to update some of the extremes of fundamentalism. However, from what I've been able to see, a lot of the mindset of fundamentalism continues to protrude through even some other careful articulations of Christian faith from an evangelical perspective. And a lot of Christian culture and American culture still kind of hangs around a really interesting attitude toward other people. If you ever wonder why more Christians aren't like Jesus, to me, I have a suspicion that it's because the spirit of the Pharisees, pointing to the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law, kind of persists in fundamentalism. And I'm sad to say, but in my opinion, several several circles of what's known as evangelicalism. There's just this attitude toward what the rules are, and if you deviate from them, your value as a human goes down in these people's eyes. And it kind of maps along what they would say God sees you, because a lot of us as humans, interestingly enough, think that what we think God thinks. These are all general observations. So going back to fundamentalism, fundamentalism was a really harsh posture toward people and circles of groups of people. Basically, when I was growing up and becoming familiar with what we call today liberals and progressives, I started noticing a lot of behavior that to me was very familiar, center left or far left, to the behavior I grew up experiencing center right and far right and conservatives. And it maps along keeping the rules or not deviating from the standards that this group of people have. So probably up to about 3 years ago, I largely saw a lot of the behaviors I see among far left progressives were familiar to me, because it even though it was a different message, it had different content, it looked a lot like the same ways that I observed Christian fundamentalists acted toward, people who don't toe the line religiously in their Christian circles. The behavior's the same. You castigate, you ridicule, you manipulate, and you control. And I started characterizing that observation. I was like, oh, well, this is the new fundamentalism. This is fundamentalism in skinny jeans. They have a different narrative, and it's interesting because I probably am center left dispositionally, because I'm open to experience. I'm not always wanting to uphold certain structures. I'm not as conscientious about some things, but I guess politically also I have probably a little bit more of a liberal view towards some things. However, because I grew up with fundamentalism and, it filtering its way through some evangelicalism too, for me, in my view, because I knew what that felt like for me, I recognized it so clearly when I saw it on the far left. I had this general sense that it hurt so bad to grow up under the power of people in Christian fundamentalism, that for people who didn't know what to do besides continue spreading pain, because pain was spread on them, they become what they're hurt by. And what a nightmare that is for all of us. Anytime we've been hurt by something and it hurts us so much that we end up becoming that pain, it's just very difficult. And so while I would observe these kind of things, and at one point in my life I was a lot more bothered than I am now, I'm just going to chalk that up to a little bit of age, or maybe growing, I hope. I just have this general sense that the far right and fundamentalism had its day in America, and now the far left is a reaction, and the pendulum is just like this. Some people might have heard Hegel express that culture develops this way and progresses in a pendulum, the Hegelian dialectic. But the general observation I'm wanting to offer is this. For the people who are frustrated with the far left, a lot of Christian fundamentalists or evangelicals are often not considering where this frustration comes from. And it's almost like I've seen little to no self-reflection or memory about how hard-nosed culturally fundamentalists have been toward people who deviate from the narrative or the line. And this is complicated because with no memory of who raised a lot of the people who are frustrated, a lot of the young voices, it's almost like no one's aware of where these kids came from, who raised these kids, and all the baby boomers are like, I don't know who raised these people. I didn't raise you to be like that. And just because I'm myself, that narrative is very familiar to me, because it occurred to me at one point in life that the people who are always saying back in my day, they got that from their grandparents. And it's not new. Every generation has its own way of saying, well, back in my day, things were this way. I didn't raise you that way. I just seem to watch this, go forward. So I just have this general observation that there is a pendulum swing from Christian fundamentalism to a new fundamentalism, newer, that is on the far left. And it's fundamentalist in nature so far as there's a purity and a villain. In so much as there's a villain, the people who don't know the narrative of the progress we should be making, I see the same difficulties that I saw in Christian fundamentalism being mapped out in the political movement of people who aren't socially progressing in the ways that we need to. It just so happens that I tend to agree with the content of our progress. I feel like conservatives, for whatever reason, are really missing the mark on living up to a lot of their values when it comes to loving people. And if I just go with the idea that the Republican Party is supposed to be evangelical, not that I like that or agree with it, but there's some values that aren't being lived up to. And while not living up to the values, this is the group of people who tend to hold the structure. So when they're frustrated or annoyed, they're not holding the structure. They're not updating the structure. They hold the structure. So when this group of people is frustrated, they lock on to the position that they're holding harder and tighter. But I feel like for people on the left, we should be observing more than we tend to, that if the left tends to have more entrepreneurs, more innovators, more progressive thinking, when we frustrate people who are tend to hold the line, we can back them into a corner that we shouldn't be surprised on. Like the people who are good at running companies, good at holding structures, good at being conscientious, process-oriented, when they are put in a tight spot, they're only going to do more of what they do in a tight spot. And those of us who want to update and ask, how are these structures serving people, we would do better if we claim to be the ones who are more forward-thinking and more open-minded. We would do better being a little bit more self-aware that if we are done updating, there's something awkward about that. We need to update about our ways and means of interacting with our neighbors and our peers that we depend on, who are dispositionally conservative or psychologically conscientious, because there is a difference between the left and the right besides just our ideas about the way the world ought to be. Even businesses have an awareness that you have different personalities that serve different goals, different dispositions tend to honor different goals better. Like a person who's a pioneer and an innovator has got a different skill set or disposition than the person who's really good at keeping the books every day, and their energy is just geared toward, keeping the books. Or the person who has a security mindset, who in the like a car, a parking lot, they're keeping up with loss, or making sure the gates are updated so people can't come in and overnight steal the wheels off of vehicles. Someone who's more security minded will do good at thinking about those issues, whereas a person who's a pioneer or a innovator their mind is more in the future than just preserving the current structure. So try not to get too in the clouds there. So generally the observation is I'm really confused why a lot of people on the left, a lot of people among conservative circles don't recognize where this disposition or this fundamentalist attitude comes from. And it's almost like just staying congruent with the mindset toward innovating and progressing. You see a lot on the left, we find new words and expressions for how to say what the social problems are, the social woes, and like new ways of expressing old problems so that we can keep trying to do better. But what happens, if I'm gathering this well, is people who are center right, this momentum is building so much. Like, we need to change. And I feel like, sadly, it's taken us this long to see it, but a lot more of the nation, with what happened to George Floyd, is becoming more conscious or aware of what a lot of people have been living in, and we have been not paying attention to. I'm just saying this because in my own way, I've been one of those people without meaning to. Basically, with all the new language that innovators and thinkers come up with to help call the problem what it is and reveal it for what it is, that momentum builds and builds and builds with frustration against the people who want to hold the structure. And the people who just want to hold the structure, the conservatives, I feel like that's what allowed this group of people to want a figure like Donald Trump so much, because he just didn't care. He would just say what he wanted to and bulldoze his perspective against the left for his ideas about what's best for America. And I'm sad to say the amount of people who identify with just being tired of being put upon by being the villains of this story. They're not being seen as anybody who has a healthy idea about America. This reality had built up so much pressure that when a figure like Trump comes along, who in my opinion is really looking out for his interest and has some things that are congruent with doing what's better for America, notice it lands on the conservative viewpoint. I'm thinking of this pragmatically. His idea of what's best, it maps to me alongside how a group of people are tired of not being able to socially push forward their perspective. Finally, we got somebody who's bully pulpiting our point of view. The left is loud bully pulpiting their point of view. Finally, we have someone bully pulpiting our point of view. And in my opinion, that's where we look at all the trade-offs we've been willing to accept. People in this group, we have been willing to accept the trade-offs of Trump's character as a person that maps nowhere along the world I grew up in conservative circles. I grew up in a world that was so sexually repressed. I remember seeing a picture of someone at a Trump rally, whenever Trump was politicking to become a president. There was a rainbow flag, and someone was championing Donald Trump from this perspective. I remember thinking, from where I grew up at, that would just be unseen or unheard of. And I remember thinking how interesting it is the Republican Party going to update on their attitudes toward homosexuals, culturally? I really don't know where that's at today, but it's just interesting. There's been a lot of, in my opinion, moral and character trade-offs from the viewpoint of conservatives, as they allow Trump to be the spokesperson of their viewpoint. But let's go back. Fundamentalism in the early 1900s and progressivism today, I had this viewpoint that this came first, because it did historically. The social pressure that maps along lines that, even in my opinion, oftentimes feels fundamentalist. It feels like it needs a villain in order to thrive, instead of what it really is aimed to do, I think, is to progress culture and to be better than we were in the 1960s, to be better than we were in the 1860s. We need to keep growing because there are humans who need better structures. When people who are trying to find better ways use the ways and means of the fundamentalists, it has a fever. I think it keeps us from doing what we mean to do. All that to say, I feel like historically the conservatives and the fundamentalists from a Christian standpoint were here first in American history. The tactics that get adopted by the young people in that generation who were hurt or ignored because of these habits, that are more interested in upholding a religious or a spiritual idea about what's best. The people who were hurt because, like, if you're gay, if you're trans, if you're anything that's not that conservative, that deeply fundamentalist attitude, you often weren't treated like a human. Those people who were hurt in this way have found some distance and some space, and when they have their own voice, if they haven't healed in a way that helps them focus on progress outside of the vitriol, a lot of the same tactics get used in a pendulum kind of way. I was going to say something about alcohol and Cracker Barrel. So Cracker Barrel, culturally, in my vision, is kind of like one of the last old world, like the way things were to some people's idea of what the way things were, probably more to center right. Y'all forgive me for laughing when I say Cracker Barrel. I know my black brothers and sisters enjoy a meal here and there too at the Cracker Barrel. But the reason why that's helpful to me is because if alcohol comes to Cracker Barrel, I know some people are going to have this attitude toward, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. They're serving alcohol at Cracker Barrel now. But I'm not surprised by that. That mindset's been around way longer than I've been here. The idea that alcohol is the world going to hell in a handbasket. Those people tend to not admit the bootleg underground movement where the police officers and the sheriffs, John Law, if you've ever heard of John Law, burned down a liquor store because he didn't get what he wanted out of the hooch runners. A lot of, seems like older people have a mindset toward alcohol being bad while not realizing how the local authorities worked with the underground. Those people tend to call this the world going to hell in a handbasket, and I'm certain some people are going to have that narrative. You're going to hear it from some older people. I can't believe alcohol is being served at Cracker Barrel. But what I see is all those people who have kids who are not living in the reality that alcohol is the devil, Bobby Boucher. They still want relationships with their kids. Their kids are okay with alcohol. My hope is that the desire to have a family and relationship will help some of the younger kids talk to their parents about their views about alcohol being the devil. Because it's almost like we need something personal and relational to bear the weight of a lot of what's happening in our culture right now. Because if we're left to our ideas about what's best and we're entrenched, we tend to go our own way, because I can't rely on my partner. I can't rely on my neighbor, my family, my friends. I can't rely on the person I'm having a country with or living in a country with. And what's so difficult about that is some people right now are fanning the flames of war And I'm just so curious, like, do you think I want to live in a world that you're in charge of? And I actually can see that on every perspective. I don't think I want to live under the leadership of anyone with a fever. My own personal views are that the conservative group of people are really far behind on some things, entrenched in some structures that are not looking forward to how there are more people in this country that want to live and breathe and have their being than fit in a Judeo-Christian mindset. And a lot of times the narrative of this being a Christian country is just completely apart from the fact that there were a lot of deists founding the country, that Thomas Jefferson, you can look this up, edited out all the miracles in his Bible because he was a son of the Enlightenment. And in his own way, if he thought there was a God at all, it wasn't a God that did miracles. This idea that this is a Christian nation is just missing a lot of context toward the founding fathers who were tired of holy wars from a church and state reality. I'm omitting a lot of information, but the main thing I'm trying to focus on is I hope that this example of, like, if alcohol does ultimately come to Cracker Barrel, which I'm told by two people who work there one day that it is coming, I hope that culturally that will map, like, the older generation who cares about their kids having a reason to see the world differently than just through the lens of alcohol is bad, Bobby Boucher. If anyone's not seen The Water Boy, you're probably wondering why my references aren't making sense. But yeah, I'm hopeful. Sometimes I'm scared because, like you, I have to live in this world with people who are more aware of why they're more aware that they're frustrated than why. And I've lived at the mercy of people like that my whole life. I don't make sense to so many people, and looking back, I get it. My name's Bumping Gums. I went to words faster than I knew how to make sense to anyone. But I am hopeful that people will somehow value their family going forward, and that some of us young people will do the work to ask the older generation to see that the world is different. Just like when they were young and their old people were confused about the world changing. That's what's not new. The world's been changing. We are not the first generation who are coming of age in a world that did things a certain way. That has been happening every generation. We're adults now. We have influence to wield and promote. I'm just hoping that we do our best and bring our gifts to bear. I think there needs to be a lot of grace and compassion for people who are doing the best they can, but they really can't see how they are, I'll add me, perpetuating some of the same problems. At the end of the day, we need room for people. If we prefer our political identity more than we prefer people, I feel like, to me, that maps out like a world where someone's in charge and there's no room for me. I'm suspicious a lot of people feel this way, but at the end of the day, we've got to communicate and talk. And I've been a little bit more critical of conservatives because, from my own point of view that I'm limited to, I know where fundamentalism came from most recently. Before the most, like, what I'm calling fundamentalism and skinny jeans, it was preceded by Christian fundamentalism. This browbeating Pharisaical attitude toward keeping God's law like this is a Christian nation and all else be damned. I'm a bit more critical of that group of people right now, not because I think I'm right about everything I think, but because I think that group is missing the mark to the tune of really dominating some people based on disagreement, and I can't go there. I'm not okay dominating people because I think God thinks this or because I think this. So I hope this was helpful. I wish you all the best. This has been Bumping Gums Learning Wagon. All right, till next time.